All right, everyone, there's a couple brand new stories we got to talk about today, starting with the Indie World presentation that Nintendo held today that I think you could argue didn't even need to take place as there was no major announcements there, but I do want to briefly cover it and share my opinions on this event. Then the big talking point for today's video is some brand new details that have emerged for Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 in terms of Link's abilities in this game, and I want to walk through it with you guys and share my impressions on what I think these will mean ultimately in gameplay, and maybe some speculation around when we will see the next Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we're covering a couple different stories today, and I want to kick it off with the Indie World presentation that was, of course, held by Nintendo earlier this morning. And I will say, just flat out to start off this conversation, that this was not a very impressive Indie World from Nintendo. We have definitely, over the course of time, seen them hold more notable events in this fashion, and I just think that there wasn't anything to really write home about or to get super excited to where you're sharing the trailers on Twitter. There was a couple interesting games, and I am going to walk through a couple of the announcements that at least somewhat stuck out to me, but I don't think this needed to be its own Indie World event just to have the event. For an example, like one game that I actually am excited for but that opened up the event is called Sea of Stars, and this looks like a very cool RPG. I'm definitely excited to check it out. It is even being made by the same people who made The Messenger, which was actually a very fun Ninja Gaiden style game, but also Metroidvania style, and I think The Messenger was fantastic. So to know that they're working on something is cool, but this opened up the event, and we are not going to see this game release until holiday 2022, and there is obviously going to be multiple indie worlds that take place since then, so it was kind of an interesting decision to put an initial trailer out that early before we can even expect the game to drop. There was then a game presented called Alicia, which I guess the interesting mechanic for this one is that they're actually catering towards two different control styles where you can use motion-based controllers with the Joy-Cons, of course, and then you could actually use touch-style controllers as a different character, probably to cater to the Switch Lite crowd, I'm assuming, but it is something that you will definitely obviously only be using touch input on a handheld play session, but I did think that that was something interesting that we don't typically see in Switch games. So that was another one that kind of stood out, not really on the top of my list by any means, but at least an interesting control mechanic. We then got something called Dungeon Munchies that was actually the shadow drop of the day. It says it'll be out later on in the eShop today, so at least there's something new to go check out if you were interested in that. One that looked kind of fun to me is Ollie Ollie World. As you know, I have a ton of nostalgia for the skateboarding style games as I grew up with the Tony Hawk games and then eventually the skate games that came out later on, but I do enjoy skateboarding games, but this one has an interesting take because it is trying to kind of be an action adventure title at the same time, and apparently there are bosses and enemies that you fight but while skateboarding, so you know, it's one that I may end up checking out when it does drop. Grime was a very interesting one to me. This looks like it is a Metroidvania style game, but I can definitely see some Dark Souls style inspiration that went into at least the art direction and the layout of kind of like your equipment setup, so it did catch my eye, and I will be excited to actually see what this game plays like when it is out, because I do think that this one, out of all of the style of the entire event and the different games that were there as a whole, besides Sea of Stars, which of course is quite a ways out, Grime was definitely the one to me that I will definitely be paying attention to when it drops, just because of the style, the art direction, and what the kind of combat looks like. And even I get interested in things like when you can get crazy weapons and you have giant beast looking bosses. Like, I definitely liked the art direction of this title, and this is the one I would say that stuck out the most out of the entire show for me, outside of, again, Sea of Stars, but that one is kind of in its own boat just because it's so far out that we don't really have a lot of information on it other than it is coming in holiday 2022. The show closer for this event was then Amori, I believe that's how you say it, and I guess this game has been out at some point. Maybe it was dropped on the PC or something like that, because they said it's already like a huge established thing. I personally have never heard of it before. It's definitely got a different style, like art style, like it's definitely a unique art style. That is what stuck out to me about this entire game, is that they went off the wall, almost like hand art drawn style, but then also cartoony. Like, I don't know exactly how to describe it to you guys. Obviously I'll have the trailer playing up on screen screen, but I would be curious to know from you really around this title if you have heard of it before, because they definitely went out of their way to say it's like an established major RPG and it's finally coming to the Switch in spring of 2022. But I want to know more about this game and what it actually has to offer, so please share in the comments down below which game was your favorite, if any, from this event, or if it was just kind of for you, similar to me, where there was nothing too notable to where, you know, you didn't really have to watch this. Like, we didn't get any TMNT Shredder's Revenge info, we didn't get any kind of Silk Song update, which of course I think that is now officially going to be saved for a mainline Nintendo Direct just because of the fan hype around it, and it's almost become this thing that isn't even considered an indie title anymore. But like I said, guys, I want to hear from you in the comments down below what stuck out to you from this Nintendo Indie World presentation, if anything, and what you thought overall of the event as a whole. So please share all your thoughts and feelings on all things Indie World in the comments down below. Now, the big story we're talking about today has to do with Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, or the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, as it is in the news today. And the reason is kind of interesting because there's actually some brand new patents, or at least patents that have been discovered online, that actually reference Link's abilities in this game. And there's been a lot of fan breakdowns since these kind of things have hit the internet, and I want to share my initial impressions on some of which we've already seen in the trailer, but then there's also a couple notable things that we really didn't know that Link could do up to this point in time. So to kick off this conversation, I do actually want to hop over to Nintendo Life, where they have all of the images sourced from these patents, kind of a breakdown of what you can expect each one to do and which ones we've seen and which ones we haven't. So let's quickly read through that article together, and then I will share my impressions on what I think this will translate to in actual gameplay. Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 gameplay concepts revealed in Nintendo patents. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, which will undoubtedly get a much cooler name from Nintendo when the time is right, made a star appearance on this year's online-only E3. The trailer above made it clear it'll be an ambitious follow-up to the much-loved original, with Link seen up in skies and doing all sorts of interesting things. Great hair too, it really is a thing of beauty. Interestingly, Game Reactor has been digging around and come across patents published by Nintendo that reinforce some of the fascinating features we saw, and in one case gives us thoughts of epic sky-falling showpieces. The patents themselves are all about concepts and technicalities around gameplay moves. For example, in the trailer we see Link go through the bottom part of a platform and emerge out on top via a portal. This patent addresses that, suggesting that when conditions allow, and of course when the game makes it accessible, Link may theoretically be able to do it with any surface. The detail goes into how the game will calculate the target destination and whether there's a valid endpoint for the player to transport themselves. Next, we have a rewind feature described in the patent as a return movement. This has been used in many games of different types, and in a Legend of Zelda game could be utilized for some interesting puzzles and dungeon designs, and could also be pretty enjoyable if it's incorporated into combat. Finally, a patent addresses different approaches to Link falling, which is more important than it admittedly sounds. It shows paragliding, of course, and also a skydiving style, as was prominently shown in the trailer. Link is also shown shifting his stance/positioning, and the patent talks about all of this in relation to how the bow shooting mechanic will be implemented for each stance. Again, this sets up some potentially thrilling sequences that could go beyond anything achieved in the original. It's interesting to see these patents and to consider how much this new entry looks to shake up and evolve the formula. Considering the impact of the original and how it revolutionized the franchise, it's exciting to consider that Nintendo seems eager to take its ideas further. So while we're all eagerly awaiting the next gameplay trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 and some kind of title reveal, it's at least nice to see some new information come from these patents. Most notably, I think, like the last one that was covered with him falling and the stance that it actually shows him with a bow in different stances, and a lot of fans online have been discussing whether or not this means that as you're falling in the sky with Link, maybe even like on your back or something falling down, that maybe you can still shoot enemies, and there's definitely going to be a lot of interesting gameplay directions that they could go with these patents being in effect. And obviously this is all conceptual stuff, so it doesn't mean that we're going to see everything ultimately make it in the game, but out of these patents we definitely did see the ability for Link to go up through the bottom of a surface to the top to essentially teleport through it. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to watch and see if that's actually going to be something that's heavily utilized in many areas, if it's just mainly utilized when you're first, you know, going up to the Sky Islands and it's very limited on when you use it, or if it plays into puzzles at all in dungeons, which I am very very much advocating for, side note, that we get some kind of traditional dungeon formula back, because for me personally, as much as I loved the original Breath of the Wild, the Divine Beast just did not do it as a dungeon replacement for me. As somebody who grew up with all of the Zelda games and played through every single one of them, I want unique elemental themed dungeons back in this game, and I would really love to see some, you know, interesting puzzles come out of them, maybe even some more traditional mechanics with finding items in the dungeon as you go, like bring back the claw shots, hook shots, something, you know, give us some classical items that you unlock and then you use those to solve puzzles in said dungeon, and then ultimately, you know, fight a unique boss at the end and go on to others. Like, I would much rather take fewer shrines throughout Hyrule that you go through and more dungeons, and really no divine beasts. Like, for me, those just didn't stick out as a unique experience. I think they were all pretty similar to each other, and again, that's just a minor gripe, but it does stick out to me as something that I didn't enjoy as much in the original Breath of the Wild. Now from there, we also saw them cover, of course, the rewind mechanic that I think will be very exciting for boss fights and different, like, if you can use it, which, to be fair, we don't know right now when you can use the rewind mechanic. We know we saw it on the trailer, obviously. That is whenever, you know, Link is encountering some enemies, it looks like a boulder rolled down towards him. He then, you know, used whatever's on his hand that we don't still fully understand what that is, and went ahead and reversed the time flow and sent it back up the mountain that it rolled down. So if you can use something like that in boss fights where you maybe have to get strategic and, you know, reverse time and watch a boss's moves unfold backwards, and then maybe that exposes some kind of weakness that wasn't there before, like, there's a lot of different exciting gameplay directions that they can go, and I am hopeful that we will get more information on Breath of the Wild 2 sooner rather than later. But of course, you know, if you watched yesterday's video, I am very much anticipating a Nintendo Direct to happen in the beginning part of the year, as we traditionally always see Nintendo do. It could take place as early as January, probably mid to late January, or as late as March, as we have historically seen them hold it in January, February, and March over the year. So I think we're going to get a Direct. Whether or not Breath of the Wild 2 is there will remain to be seen. I definitely hope it is, but I'm also tempering my expectations to probably expect this game to show up in a big way at the E3 Direct, because I think that that's when Nintendo's going to give us the Treehouse gameplay breakdown. They're going to reveal the title and really jump straight into the full second half of the year marketing for this game. My own personal prediction again, but I do hope we get more information that is solid and concrete, and new gameplay trailers, and hopefully finally the title, so we know what to really call this thing instead of Breath of the Wild 2. Because, you know, if Nintendo is smart in their marketing, and they know that they want the title to be out at least in some relatively reasonable amount of time from when the game drops. So at this point in the video, guys, I want to hear from you on all your thoughts and opinions on both stories we talked about today. Did you enjoy the indie world, and were there any games that you are going to be interested in picking up? And then I really want to hear from you on what do you think about these patents as far as Link's ability in Breath of the Wild 2, and what do you want to see from the game personally? Because I mentioned I want to see some traditional dungeons and items and some of the more basic puzzle mechanics come back from more of like the traditional Zelda games that I grew up with. But I would love to know if you think Breath of the Wild, the first one we got, is actually the correct direction to go, and you would rather have more divine beasts and not see the traditional dungeons or items return. Like, I would love to get a back and forth conversation started with you all around what you hope to see in the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So please share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave the video. Thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. I do truly appreciate you all sticking around until the end. I do at this point in the video want to invite you all one more time to join Sunbro Nation if you haven't done so already. Do so by subscribing below, hit the like button on your way out if you enjoyed it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. That's going to do it for me, guys. I hope you all have a great day. Sunbro Nation, out.